Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Carroll County Broadband Symposium. My name is Matt Day, and I'm the Director of Workforce Training and Business Services here at the college. And I'm also serving as the Vice President of the Carroll Technology Council. The Tech Council, for those who are not familiar with it, is an independent, nonprofit, member-based organization. We're located right here in Carroll County. And our mission is to provide leadership, information, and resources to educate, attract, and influence technology in Carroll County. So this event fits perfectly within our mission because it's an opportunity to work with all of our community partners to provide an educational opportunity for the Carroll County citizens and businesses. I'd like to take a moment to thank our event sponsor, Kevin Brown, with Quantum Internet and Telephone. Kevin, thank you very much. Kevin's generous support made this event possible. Also like to thank the Big Screen Store for providing that ultra-high definition television out there in the lobby. So feel free to stop by their stand and also Quantum Internet and Telephone stand as well in the lobby. Also like to recognize the planning committee partners that worked over the past few months to put this event together. From the Carroll County Department of Economic Development, we have Denise Beaver and John Wheatman. Also, the Carroll County Chamber of Commerce, Mike McMullen. Carroll County Government, Mark Ripper. And representing the Carroll County Public Library and Carroll 2030, Lynn Wheeler. From the Carroll County Public Schools, Mr. Gary Davis. Dr. Robert Wack from the City of Westminster. The Community Media Center, who is doing the recording this evening, Marion Ware. And from Carroll Community College, Karen Merkel, Beth Lee, and yours truly. And last but not least, the Carroll Technology Council, President Gary Ditto, and our administrator, Katie Townsley. So we do hope that you find this evening very educational and informative. It's a great way for all of us to learn more about what the broadband infrastructure for Carroll County is going to provide for us as residents and as business people. One order of housekeeping, if you don't mind, please take a moment to silence your cell phones. Not too many of you are reaching for them. And to get started, I'd like to welcome to the podium the President of Carroll Community College, Dr. James Ball.
Thank you, Matt. It is an absolute pleasure to be here tonight, and I mean that with everything that's in me. And at the risk of sounding unpresidential, I'm stoked about this tonight. This is really a major event in my thinking. From the days that I had the pleasure of serving with others in the room on the Community Media Center board, and we were talking about connectivity and access to broadband and the fiber ring, and there's been a very forward-thinking element in Carroll County trying to get things done. And when we get this many people in a room at a resource that is able to use and kind of deal with the technology that might come forward, and to help get people trained to get them out to deal with that technology in the future and so on, it's just a mind-blowing experience, I think, to be honest with you. So it's with great pleasure I welcome everyone to the college tonight, and I look forward to the wisdom that we'll be hearing tonight. Have a brother that is in the Chattanooga area, has been he just retired recently, but he was the manager of the plant for Grace Corporation down there, and in a couple of instances had a lot of opportunity to work with the Chamber of Commerce in Chattanooga to be able to benefit from the broadband connectivity that's there, and he speaks with great pride about what Chattanooga's able to do. And as we were talking about what was going on here tonight, I said, well, actually, we're going to be talking with some of those folks. So that also is part of the reason I'm stoked tonight. So welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming. And it's my pleasure at this point to introduce a man who needs really no introduction, Robert Wack, who is a big leader in this whole broadband initiative, and as we know, the president of the Westminster City Council. So, Robert, please come up to the podium.
Thank you, Dr. Ball. Before you leave, we need to do one little bit of housekeeping here. There's a drawing for a $25 gift certificate to Harry's Main Street Grill that business cards were placed in this basket. Dr. Ball just drew the business card of Mike McMullen.
How many did you put in?
Put it back. Draw another one.
Somebody else. I finally won something.
Bill Cheney. All right, Harry's Main Street Grill. So thank you again, Dr. Ball, for that wonderful introduction. Thank you also to Carroll Community College for hosting this event. It's amazing that we've filled the room, sold out. Thanks also to the Carroll Technology Council for being the organizer and the moving force. Katie Townsley's done a fantastic job. And Gary Ditto, thank you for embracing this and running with it when we first started kicking the idea around. Thanks also to, once again, Quantum Internet for our corporate sponsorship. They made all this wonderful stuff happen with their support. The Brown family have been broadband pioneers in this community for as long as I've been here, and we look forward to them continuing to be leaders in broadband in our community in coming years. So I'm going to switch microphones here. Is this working? It's on? Now? Can you hear me now? All right. So for my piece of this, and it's not going to take too long, I'd like to make this a little interactive and make it kind of interesting to answer some questions about, what is broadband? So, a dry technical definition of broadband is moving large amounts of data between two locations, right? So what? Why do we care about that? Why is broadband important to us? Why should we be concerned about whether we have access to good broadband in our community? So to do that, I'd like to do a little medical experiment, and I need a volunteer from the audience. Perfect. Come on up. Bring your straws. So this is an audience participation thing. You've got a package of straws at your place. All right. You don't have to, but if you want, feel free to play along. So Steve, thank you. So I'm sure there's some lawyers in the audience. I know there's at least one. So it's a medical experiment. We have to get your consent here, informed consent. So there will be no needles, no scalpels, no blood will be drawn. There will be no pain, and I'm pretty sure there won't be any permanent damage. So you're okay with that? Okay. So pull out the smallest straw. No, the even smaller one than that. Okay. And feel free to do this in the audience. Go ahead and put it in your mouth, pinch your nose, and only breathe through that straw. And just do it for as long as you can. Don't hurt yourself, though. And just give a wave when you've given up. Okay. So how did that make you feel?
Constricted.
Why?
Because I like oxygen.
Okay. So oxygen, so what? What's the big deal with oxygen? Why do you need oxygen?
It's very comfortable to breathe nice.
So if you didn't get enough oxygen, what would happen?
I'd probably pass out and you'd be picking me up. But one of these nice people.
Right. And then you're a big guy. I don't want to do that. So your brain needs oxygen. Your brain needs oxygen. Your body needs oxygen. Your heart needs oxygen. All of your vital organs need oxygen to do what they need to do to keep you alive. And that little straw wasn't giving you enough oxygen. So take the medium-sized straw. Do the same thing. Pinch your nose. Better?
Absolutely.
But is it enough?
Not if I had to run around a block.
Okay, good point. So this next straw is the bigger one. So these are those big fat straws you get from Panera, and thank you, Panera, for donating these big fat straws. Another plug. So go ahead and put that one in your mouth. Pinch your nose. Feels pretty good, right?
Feels like I'm snorkeling. Snorkeling, yeah.
Okay. So, but could you run around the block with that?
Absolutely.
Yes? Could you sprint, could you run a mile as fast as you can?
I could do it.
You could? Okay. Could you climb a mountain with that straw?
It depends on the mountain.
All right. Well, let's take a little bit further. What if we took the Westminster boys basketball team and put those straws in their mouths and pinched their noses closed? Could they win a state championship?
I wouldn't bet on it, not with a small straw.
With the big one? Come on, throw me a bone here.
With the big one, yes.
This is the problem with volunteers, it's like children and animals, performance art. All right, so you think they could or they couldn't?
With a large straw, sure.
Okay. We should have rehearsed this. Okay. All right, well, thank you so much. So, you see where I'm going with this, right? So the little straw was completely inadequate for providing his body with the necessary oxygen to even stay conscious, right? Much less do anything. The medium straw, maybe a little bit better, but certainly he's not running any sprints or winning any basketball games with the medium straw. The big straw, he claims he can run a mile with that. But I tell you, I would defy any of you put that straw in your mouth and run a mile. It would be hard. But hey, he's probably better, more fit than anybody else. So the straw was limiting the amount of oxygen. Oxygen is absolutely essential to do what you need to do to prosper, to survive, to excel, to reach your fullest potential. So what happens if you have a straw like this? It's a big straw, right? So the first question people would say was like, well, you don't need a straw this big. Who needs a straw this big? This is ridiculous how big this straw is, right? You're never going to use this much oxygen. And you can see a little bit of a problem there. To paraphrase Roy Scheider in Jaws, you're going to need a bigger mouth. So let's relax the laws of biology and say that you can upgrade. You can swap out some parts on your body and get a bigger mouth so that you can put this straw in your mouth and use it for breathing. What becomes possible? How fast could you run with a straw this big to get that much oxygen? How much stronger would you be with that much oxygen? How much higher could you jump? How much bigger a brain could you have? How much smarter would you be? And if you're swapping parts out, what other improvements to your body could you make? Could you have wings? So a lot of possibilities with the bigger straw. So I know I'm beating this metaphor to death here, so I'll cut to the chase. In the 21st century, data is oxygen, and your broadband connection is the straw through which you breathe. So when it comes to educating our children, allowing them to reach their fullest potential, enabling them to achieve wonderful things in their fullest... Whoops. Helping our children achieve their fullest potential. Do you want them breathing through this, or do you want them breathing through this? When it comes to small businesses, new job creation, new innovations, creating the next great thing, the next great technological boom that's going to take our economy to new levels. Do we want to get our data through this, or do we want to get it through this? When it comes to just improving the quality of life in our community, raising income levels, creating new opportunities for our children and our grandchildren, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, do we want to be breathing through this, or do we want to be breathing through this? This is why broadband's important, and this is why we're all here today. And clearly, you all already understand this because you're here tonight. But we've got some great speakers who are going to expand on this, and I would like to make some introductions for our next speaker. So our next speaker is Mr. Blair Levin, who is currently the Executive Director of GigU, the Next Generation Network Innovation Project, an initiative of 36 leading research university communities seeking to support educational and economic development by accelerating deployment of next-generation networks. He is most recently of the Brookings Institution. There's been a change, and I think this says something different. And most notably, and probably the most interesting, cool thing I've heard, is that the current chair of the FCC recently tweeted that Mr. Levin is the single most productive person working on broadband issues in our country right now. So it's a huge honor to have him come to Carroll County and talk about broadband. Blair?
Thank you very much. And thank you, Dr. Wack. You're extremely well known in policy circles in Washington, D.C. And usually I get invited to these things through policy people. This one I actually got invited by my neighbor, a guy named Brian Frosch, who was meeting with you and told me I had to come do this. But I'm very grateful that you did invite me and that Brian asked me to do this because it's great to be here and great to talk about broadband stuff. I'm gonna, just by way of background, I was chief of staff at the FCC in the 90s when the internet rose up. Went and worked on, did some consulting after that, worked on Wall Street for a little while. Came back to government to do the National Broadband Plan in 2010. And since then, I was at the Aspen Institute, started the Gig.U thing. I'll talk about that in a second, but since we're at a college, I think I have to ask at least one question of the class, right? So my question, and it's not exactly a trick question, but the question is, what is the opposite of tragedy? Anyone want to just throw out the obvious answer? Comedy, right. That's the obvious answer, but I was thinking about it, and it's not really true. Tragedy is when things go, in the theater, it's true. You know, you could say Hamlet's the opposite of Seinfeld, and that would kind of work. My favorite line about this, actually, Mel Brooks famously said, comedy is when you fall into a manhole open manhole and die, and tragedy is when I get a paper cut, which just shows a different kind of point of view about comedy and tragedy, I suppose. But in real life, tragedy is things going badly. Tragedy is what's going on in the Middle East. Tragedy is Ebola. The opposite of that is not comedy. The opposite of that is things going well. The opposite is the quarantine and Ebola stopping, right, or something like that. And I was thinking about this very specifically because there's this economic idea called the tragedy of the commons. It's been written about for many years. And the tragedy of the commons is when people acting in their self-interest use up a common resource in a way in which everyone is worse off. The kind of iconic example of this was sheep herders in the commons in England who would overgraze the sheep because they were acting in their self-interest. But that eventually meant that the commons was destroyed. And a lot of economists talk about this in terms of air and water and other resources. But I have been searching in vain for a concept or a slogan that expresses the opposite thought, which is what happens when people acting actually in their self-interest, but they see their self-interest as working in common with others to create a common resource. And we have lots of examples of this. In fact, we're in one. This institution was created by all of us in common, by the state, by the county, and we're all better off because of it. I think anyone who's ever been to Central Park in New York has to think, thank God these people did this 150 years ago. The city would be horrible. The city has its problems, but it would be absolutely a disaster without it. I don't know if any of you have been to the High Line, another version of Central Park, and something that one of those things that you walk on in New York and go, 100 years from now, people will be so grateful that this generation created this. Every time, driving here, I must have passed 5 dozen churches. And every time I've been to a church or a synagogue or another religious institution, I'm always struck by the bulletin boards, because it is almost inevitably about people working together to create a common resource and improve our common lives. What does that have to do with broadband? Well, it's interesting. In the last few months, there's been a real explosion of news about communities that have been trying to create the common resource of broadband, because you don't buy broadband the way you buy suit. You go to a store, there's lots of different choices, both in stores and in suits. You buy the individual suit, that's fine. But broadband, we actually buy it together. The community either gets it together or it doesn't. And so in May, I was in Champaign-Urbana, where the University of Illinois, along with the two cities, announced striking a deal with a small ISP, a local ISP, to create a network very similar to that which you're trying to do here. One that has this and not that little pipe. In June, a group that I worked with in North Carolina, Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill, Cary, Carrboro, and Winston-Salem, where Wake Forest University is, got together and they did an RFP, and they struck a deal. They got about 8 responses, had a little bidding going on, and struck a deal with AT&T. They're still negotiating with Google. But that area is going to go from an area with no pipes like that to possibly 2 or even 3. There's someone else too. In July, the University of Louisville and the city of Louisville made an announcement about 3 folks who were coming in to, again, build a pipe like that. This month, or last month, I was in Connecticut with a bunch of cities doing it. The city of Lexington announced one. Albuquerque announced one. Columbia, Missouri is working on one. So of the 36 communities I started working with back in 2011 with this Gig.U project to try to accelerate the deployment of next generation networks, about 2 dozen of them either have deployed networks or are in the process of doing that. Now, why are they doing that? Well, I think they all see what Dr. Wack saw, which is the future is bandwidth. Right now, it's true already, and it's going to be even more true 10 years from now, that everything we do will depend on the quality of the network. That doesn't mean, every action you take. It doesn't mean your kids or grandkids either succeed in soccer or they don't succeed. I don't want to exaggerate it, but I mean business, civic life, social life, all will have a component that is delivered over a broadband pipe. And if you have the functionality, you're going to be better off. And the interesting thing is these communities all understood what Dr. Wack understood. What we're doing today affects the broadband we have 10 years from now. What we do with zoning, what we do with how we handle rights of ways, how we act together as a community. Because these things take a long time to build. Google, the fastest company in the world, announced its Google Fiber project in March of 2010. It actually came out of discussions I had with them in the plan. They're still building their first network in Kansas City. These things take time. This is not an algorithm. So if we want to be where we want to be in 10 years, we got to start now. There's something else which these communities understood, which is the current market forces were not going to deliver the broadband that we need. And so they had to take it upon themselves to do that. Just like, in education, we created this community college because market forces by themselves. I'm a capitalist, I've worked on Wall Street, but, markets do some things really well and other things they don't do well. One of the interesting things about broadband is it delivers a lot of public goods. We generally finance it privately, but a lot of people are looking for experimentation because the way the private markets necessarily work, what we saw in the broadband plan was the private markets had a lot of incentives to have scarce bandwidth, to be able to essentially harvest what they had invested in years ago as opposed to invest to make sure that Americans have the fastest, bestest, cheapest broadband. Now, I haven't answered the question, though, of why you actually need that. I'm going to have my good friend Bill Wallace do more of that in terms of the applications, but I want to say a couple things about that. There's a lot of different answers. Tomorrow, the Pew Research Center is releasing a 55-page report that interviews about 1,400 folks and has a bunch of snippets of their views of what the great gigabit applications will be. I'm not allowed to tell you what the report says because it's embargoed, but I'll just say the vast majority of them said that we would develop some very, very compelling applications. In fact, Bill's already working on them. But let me just give you two different answers that aren't in the report. First, the economics data is already showing that the market forces are recognizing the power of what I think of as future-proof networks. We don't know how fast they need to be, but you need a conduit that can go up to any speed. And the current networks have very restrictive bandwidth, so you need this fiber that can constantly scale up. For example, University of Colorado, admittedly it's an early study, but homes with access to fiber were worth $5,000 more than equivalent homes that didn't have it. I was in St. Louis, and if you think about that, by the way, at $5,000, the cost may be $1,500. I don't know how much it's going to cost to connect every home, but it's a lot less than $5,000. The problem is the cost is to the provider, the benefit is to the homeowner. So that's part of the economic problem that I think we're trying to deal with here in this county and in other places. I was in St. Louis a couple weeks ago at a similar forum. An economic development guy pointed out that in terms of like the list of things that businesses are looking to when they move, within the last year, big connectivity went from 14 to 4. I was at a Kennedy School thing a year ago. Fiber wasn't on the list of city officials for things they cared about. Now it's number 2. There was a report came out 2 weeks ago from the Fiber to the Home Council. It said the 14 communities that have widely distributed fiber had an economic gain, GDP gain of $1.4 billion. This is huge. We're not talking about New York or Los Angeles here. So the market is already recognizing and already showing, and I might note the New York Times had a story back in May talking about how a bunch of entrepreneurs are flocking to Kansas City because it's one of the few places you can get fiber. You know, it could have been these entrepreneurs recognized that the Kansas City Royals were going to have a really good year, but somehow I think that. I don't think that. And besides, Baltimore will win anyway, so that'll be great. So anyway, that's one answer. You can see it there, but I'm going to tell you my best answer, and then I'm going to turn it over to Bill. I was at the University of Maine about 2 years ago. We were doing an event somewhat similar to this. We had people like me, and we had professors, and we had other people all giving very eloquent answers. And then a senior got up and said he was really excited about this project. And the most exciting thing for him and for his generation is what we don't yet know. And he's absolutely right. That actually is the most exciting thing about it. When you eliminate bandwidth as a constraint to innovation, and when you start thinking about what that means for how we do medicine and how we do education and how we do entertainment and how we do job training and all kinds of other things, when you eliminate bandwidth as a constraint to innovation, you get a whole new generation that gets the same kind of excitement and the same kind of power in their lives to create the future. And that to me is what's really exciting about what we've been able to do with Gig.U. I don't really know what people will do with it. That's what's really exciting about what you all are doing here. I'm happy to answer any questions. I guess we'll do this later in the panel. But with that, mostly I just want to say thank you so much for what you're doing, which will be an inspiration. One of the reasons we had to start Gig.U was we had to get some examples out there. And it turns out university communities are pretty easy. So, you know, they're good examples, but what you're going to do, I know, is going to inspire a lot of other communities as well. So I thank you for that. And with that, let me turn it back to you to introduce Bill.
Thanks, Blair. So our next speaker is Mr. Bill Wallace, who is the Executive Director of US Ignite. Bill brings more than 30 years of experience in the telecommunications industry, most recently as co-founder of Digital Bridge Communications, a venture-backed startup dedicated to bringing 4G broadband wireless services to underserved portions of the U.S. Bill and I were introduced to each other by Joanne Hovis, who's a mutual friend of all of ours in the telecommunications industry, and we met over Chinese food down near where my mom lives. Because he's in Chevy Chase, and so we've kind of bonded over Chinese food. I really appreciate you coming out here, Bill, and telling us about US Ignite.
Thank you, Dr. Brack.
You want to use this?
I'll probably use this. Thank you. It's great to be here, and what a beautiful drive. Blair and I are comparing notes on. We may be back up here a lot more often. It's so gorgeous. But let me describe what US Ignite is all about, and then, as Blair said, I'll describe some of the new applications that are coming about because of networks like the ones you're putting in here in Carroll County and Westminster. We're a nonprofit aimed at creating new applications that run on broadband networks like the ones you're putting in for public benefit in sectors like healthcare and transportation, clean energy, education, and advanced manufacturing. We were launched at the White House about 2 years ago because the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy is convinced that it's a competitive necessity for the United States to figure out what to do with these networks before other countries in the world do. And it is the future. Data is the oxygen, as Dr. Wack said. Our goal's pretty straightforward. Over the next couple of years, we want to create 60 transformative applications, and I have every reason to believe that one or more of those will be created right here in Carroll County. We want to do that on 200 test beds, like Carroll County, and we want to coordinate across those communities. I'm hoping tonight that I can encourage, as you put your fiber networks in, to encourage you to join US Ignite so that we can partner together on this. Our goals are to create communities that can share great ideas across networks, and we hope to connect the cities that are putting in fiber to each other so they can easily share new applications. And as you'll see as I go through some of these examples, economic development is a very important component to what we're seeing in the early cities that have adopted next-generation fiber networks. And by the way, when I talk about next generation, we often talk about speed and the size of pipes, but there's two-way speed, right? You're getting the same speed up and down, which is really important for creating content as well as consuming content as more downloads. But the networks are getting a lot smarter. Software-defined networking is a phenomenon that's taking over so that application developers can derive what the network will do for them as opposed to having to wait for network engineers to figure it out. And when you have a fast network, you can also put local storage and compute capabilities closer to where you are. And there are a lot of things you can do with that. We call it locavore computing. And some communities are finding that's really great in the education world for creating virtual reality training and other kinds of activities. A lot of partners have joined US Ignite because there are a lot of people betting on this as a competitive necessity for the U.S. in competing internationally and in growing our students who can take advantage of these networks. I'm not going to go through all of them. Computer developers are important. Some of our communities are using the fact that they have new fiber networks to train every student in coding. And it's been said if data is the oxygen, coding is the riveting of the next generation. So learning coding is real important for students, and some of our communities are bringing Code Academy, which is a great organization for training people, young people, how to code. And we work with Code for America, we work with Mozilla Ignite, and many of our communities that have joined US Ignite. We have about 35 communities thus far. We'd love to make Carroll County the number 36 and start working with you on some of these kinds of things. We have an annual summit where we get together and demonstrate 30 new applications every year. We had one most recently in Silicon Valley. Blair spoke at our event last year, and it's great to see university professors come out, cities come out with new ideas, students come out with new ideas to take advantage of these fiber networks. And it's not easy, because what we're saying to people is, let's come up with some ideas of applications to solve community problems that cannot be solved today using today's internet. So this is coming up with things that are better than we have today. We've created a new exchange site where developers who have a new idea can find communities who need that idea, and where communities that are looking for new and better applications can find the developers. And it's already started to take hold. We had a case, there's a guy up in Burlington, Vermont who developed a cybersecurity app that was discovered by a federal government agency on our site, and they're talking about actually funding the new app. So there's some, we kind of want to get out of the middle so this can happen more organically than having us have to travel around and present PowerPoint presentations. But it's starting to happen, and we're glad to see that. Let me describe 3 communities. Dr. Wack asked me to describe what's gone on in some communities that have put in fiber, like you're planning to put in Carroll County and Westminster. And one of the most recent ones is in Burlington, Vermont. They have a fiber network called Burlington Tel. And what they've done is they've set up an accelerator team. And this is some things you might want to think about as you move toward deployment and taking advantage of your network. They've created an accelerator team under the mayor's guidance, and they've called it BTV Ignite. They've created a playbook describing what they're going to do with it. They've kicked the tires on the network to make sure that all the schools are connected, the museums are connected, and as many homes and businesses are connected, including maker spaces and other incubator sites. They've identified what they want to be good at. In other words, they want to be good at cybersecurity, edu-gaming, manufacturing, and neuroscience. So they've reached into the University of Vermont and found some core capabilities in the university that were not being taken advantage of by the community. So they reached in and engaged the professors and said, let's start doing some things in neuroscience and farm systems and complex systems, areas that had been real strong at the university but not spread throughout the community. And then they've created a constant stream of entrepreneurial activity. So every weekend, about every other weekend, there's a hackathon or a maker fair or a billion bits breakfast or a million cups breakfast or a codeathon. And it gets the entrepreneurs in the community to come out and do things together. It also brings retired executives who may have been working at IBM 20 years ago to come out. So it's a great way to collaborate across the entire community to create new ideas. And then they're sharing ideas with Kansas City and with Chattanooga and sharing applications across the network and hopefully finding some funding sources. One of the things we've been able to do is not direct people to funding, but make people aware in communities of available funding. There's an I-6 program, for example, under the Economic Development Administration that is perhaps very attractive to Carroll County, and I'm sure you're probably looking at that, but it could be a great way. And I think in Kansas City they were able to put in a $2 million digital sandbox using funds from this I-6 program, and it's just come out, and I think the grants are due in early November. We'll talk to Jed from the Chamber of Commerce in Chattanooga, but this is one of the great stories. It has a network that reaches 150,000 citizens and businesses. It's focused on, again, smart grid because it's electric utility, additive manufacturing or 3D manufacturing, healthcare, and education. They've created a group of teacherpreneurs. These are progressive teachers who are trying to figure out a way to use next generation technologies to enhance the learning experience for their students. And it's been funded by a local foundation called the Benwin Foundation, which is nice to have. They've set up innumerable entrepreneurial events, one during the summer called Gig Tank, where they bring in 8 or 9 entrepreneurial teams who compete during the course of the summer and use the network to its fullest. They've set up Hackanoogas. We don't call them hackathons, they're called Hackanoogas. Startup weeks. In fact, today is a startup week in Chattanooga. And they're creating a planning and innovation district. A lot of big businesses have come to town. You can't always say they've come to town because of the fiber, but VW recently expanded its plant in Chattanooga and added 2,000 jobs. Amazon has a big distribution facility down there, as does HomeServe USA. So there are a lot of ones. And they've added 6,000 new jobs over the last 4 to 5 years, several thousand of which have come in part due to the gig. It's hard to, again, pin down, but the gig network has made a big difference. And I think Blair's statistics bore that out. And finally, Kansas City. They've assembled a team. They've created a playbook with citizen involvement to figure out what to do once Google decided it was going to come to town. They've enhanced the infrastructure. A well-known gentleman in charge of pushes startups invested in hacker homes. So basically created homes that are connected to gigabit fiber so that anyone who wanted to come and rent those homes could have gigabit fiber and come up with new and better things to do. Again, there's a constant stream of entrepreneurial activities, maker fairs. Kaufman Foundation locally has been sponsoring startup weekends, digital sandbox. They've got a strong robotics program in 54 schools. So again, a lot of things going on. It's said that it's enhanced their bond rating. So just as property values go up in communities that put in fiber, there's some cities that are seeing an enhanced financial structure overall. So what we've seen is create a core team that wakes up, and I can tell Dr. Wack is probably a charter member of that team, wakes up sleeping, breathing these ideas. make sure the infrastructure includes not just homes and businesses, but also anchor institutions, because there's a lot of open government kinds of activities that cities have taken part in, as well as hospitals, schools, and museums. Simulate a constant stream of activities so people have places where they can meet up and create new ideas, and then coordinate across other cities that are doing the same thing. We hope to have a gigabit network connecting all these cities so that there's an easy platform for sharing, and then leverage national partnerships like internet, like the Commerce Department, Economic Development Administration, and so on. One of the reasons we're finding this economic activity takes place, or more than one, but one of them is that there are not a lot of large businesses today in this part of the marketplace. There are so many new things coming out once you have a fiber network that it's ripe for entrepreneurs. And as I said earlier, it sometimes brings out pockets of the community who have not participated and not been really engaged, say a university professor who's got a specific subject area. This is a great way to involve young people throughout the community in that particular project. It's also a great way to focus your resources and make sure you are knowing what capabilities you want to focus in on. And as I said, involving many, many types of entrepreneurial activities through hacker spaces, maker spaces. And it's just, if you ask the mayor in Burlington, what he'd say is that what we've done up there together has been his most exciting part of the last 3 to 4 years, because it's engaged the community in a common goal. So what kind of characteristics do we see with next generation applications that take advantage of the kind of fiber network that's going in Carroll County? First of all, it's real time, almost instantaneous, and you don't see that very often today. It's very low latency, so there are no delays or limited delays. And you don't see any buffering and circles going around while you're waiting for video. Highly reliable. Today's internet often goes through 8 to 12 router stops before it gets back to the internet from you, so it's not a real reliable network. This is going to be creating much more reliability. Internet of Things, the government tends to call it cyber-physical interactions. We call it Internet of Things, where you've got sensors who can help monitor seniors who are living in place, or fire or safety aspects of a city. Big data, so that you can crunch lots of data and share it with many people from their homes or small businesses. Real visual data becomes something that is very valuable. Very collaborative applications that enable you to work with people across distances, and distributed. Again, people are collaborating, working together, but are across far areas. And I got a few examples that have come out of these various events we've had, but I would agree with Blair that most likely the ones I'm going to show you are not the ones that are going to be developed. We don't know. I think it's up to the imagination of people like you and your kids and your colleagues in the city. But with a fiber network, you should have the ability to have low cost, I mean very low cost, two-way collaboration, so that a doctor could see you in your home and you don't have to go to the emergency room or the doctor's office. You can imagine using this for an education as well. And there are professors working at Case Western and other parts of the country on a connected collaboration that would provide that capability. Immersive learning, when you have locavore computing and connected to a gigabit fiber, you can do things that you can't imagine today in a classroom. And it's just left to the imagination of progressive teachers, enabling students to manipulate this Mars lander and put it on Mars and move it around. Or imagine teaching the Battle of Gettysburg and you could put the student in the battle, dressed up as a northern soldier or southern soldier and watching Pickett's charge. Those are the kind of things that can be done. And we're finding a lot of the applications in this area coming out of the Department of Defense, because they've used that to train soldiers for readiness, how to go into an urban battlefield and deal with that. We think there's going to be some good fallout from that will benefit education. Public apps. In Kansas City, the library is transforming itself by using its gigabit network to make available expensive software on a reservation basis for students. Students who graduate have been very used to using Photoshop Pro, for example, and it's very expensive. Now they can do it by reserving it from the public library. And that's one that we'd love to make available to communities like Carroll and Westminster. Virtual supercomputer, where you're sharing computing power across neighbors so that you have the power to do drug testing from your home. Big data, we talked about genomic research. Imagine doing that from your home. Imagine looking at your own genomic makeup down the road. That's not going to be impossible. Remote radiology, imagine not having to go to the emergency room in the middle of the night, or if you're in the emergency room in the middle of the night, having a radiologist view your images immediately from his or her home. surgical training. We don't expect remote surgery to be something immediately available, but mentoring is definitely possible with high-speed gigabit networks, so that you have a doctor who's really studied your body, 3D image of your body before you go in for surgery, and then is mentored on that from another doctor who's managed that same surgery thousands of times, more than you have. Personal sensor networks, a lot of information is on the cloud. We've got some cities working with Samsung to create a diabetes dashboard that's available on the cell phone and in the cloud, so that doctor, patient, and the caregivers can all see the same 6 statistics on blood pressure and blood sugar and exercise and calorie intake. Very reliable process control for manufacturing, collaborative design for manufacturing, low-level radar. Right now, radar is not as accurate as it could be. This is a project funded by National Science Foundation that will enable us to see weather down to the block level. And finally, in Chattanooga, the team there has created a massive simulation application that enables the city to make citizens aware of if there's a chemical spill. You can tell the citizens where the chemical spill is going to go and how to get out of town the right way. So these are just a couple examples. Another one is it's called Planet Impact, where you can help involve the citizens in planning the land use of a city through a virtual real situation. You can imagine if we have 6 inches of rain, what would happen to the city streets and sewers and water systems in this case. So with that, I'm going to stop and this is just as I said, we've probably got about 60 application examples that have come out of our various activities. These are some of the more forward-looking ones, but we've got a number of other ones. I fully expect some of the better ones to come from Carroll County, and I hope that you can join US Ignite when the fiber's in place, and we look forward to partnering with you to come up with some transformative applications. Thanks for your time.
So our next speaker is going to be Skyping in from Chattanooga. J. Ed Marston is formerly with the Chattanooga Chamber of Commerce, and Matt is going to be pulling him in here, and he's going to give us some insights, a little bit more detail in about Chattanooga's experience with their fiber deployment and the impact it's had on their community. So bear with us while we get Mr. Marston.
Hello? Yes, I can.
We don't see you, but we do hear you. Are you able to see us?
I can, and
There you
now
go. There he is. Well, Jed, you're on.
all right. Well, this is the first time I've addressed such a large group through Skype, so you'll pardon me if it's a little bit awkward. My name is Jed Marston. I lead marketing for EPB in Chattanooga, and EPB is formerly known as the Electric Power Board. It's an organization that came into being around 1935. We're municipally owned. We're actually a board of the city of Chattanooga. And before that, I led marketing for the Chattanooga Chamber. And so I'm going to tell this story starting with my experience of Chattanooga. So I arrived in Chattanooga in 2002, and my way in was I was living in Atlanta, and we drove about an hour and a half north to Chattanooga for a 3-day weekend, and fell absolutely in love with Chattanooga and decided to move there. And getting a job at the chamber was the way that we were able to do that. So I spent my first 12 years here really working on economic development. Was part of the team that recruited the Volkswagen Auto Assembly plant here and a number of other things. But in 2010, EPB came to us, and this was the era when you may recall Google had announced they were going to lay fiber in some lucky community somewhere in the United States. And there was quite a bit of almost prankish stuff going on with communities renaming themselves Google for a day on April Fool's Day and all sorts of crazy stuff like that. And EPB, some representatives from EPB came over to the chamber and they said, you know, that thing that Google's talking about doing, well, we've already done it. So I was tasked with joining with EPB to figure out how to market it, how to turn it into an economic development tool. And in August of 2010, they had laid enough of the network that we went forward with an announcement that EPB had laid the first community-wide fiber optic network in the United States and was capable of delivering a gig to anywhere within that network. And my role at that time was on the PR side, helping them place the initial article which appeared in the New York Times about that. To step back just a moment, I think it's important to understand that EPB may be a little bit different from other communities in that laying the fiber optic network for them really began with the premise that it would be an asset to the electric system. As I said, EPB had been our local electric provider for many years, distributor within the TVA network. And they'd gotten into telecommunications in the early 2000s. But the real starting point for fiber for this community and this company was looking at smart grid. And the people here at EPB looked at a number of options. As you know, there are lots of different ways that smart grid can be done. But they decided they didn't want to put in a communications network that was going to be obsolete pretty much as soon as it was deployed. And so they decided, you know, nothing's faster than the speed of light, so that the fiber optic, a fiber optic network would be the best option for the communication system that they wanted to create. This was actually figured out several years before the process of implementation began. The company at that time knew that's the way they wanted to go, but they also knew that the market wasn't quite right yet. Fiber was too expensive at that point. And so they actually put a strategic plan in place and were ready to go when the market kind of met their plan. So in 2010, they completed the community-wide fiber optic network and began delivering, offering gig service residentially and, of course, commercially. They also, over the next 2 years, began to deploy smart grid infrastructure. And that consists of what's called a smart meter on pretty much every home in Chattanooga. We do have a few people who, for a variety of reasons, felt that a smart meter would be intrusive. And so EPB just skipped them. But except for a few dozen households, all households have a smart meter. And they have also deployed about 1,200 interrupter switches. And these are automated electrical switches that are on the grid. And so really the benefits that Chattanooga enjoys from the fiber optic network are kind of manifold. So starting off with talking about the network kind of by the numbers, EPB has laid fiber to every home and business. It's about 170,000 premises, and all of them in a 600 square mile area. So another thing that's unique about Chattanooga, and this is not true even in the Google Fiber communities, is that every single home and business in the community has access to the network if they subscribe. And so if you can imagine that a trailer park in a relatively rural area in our county is able to get a gig speed should they want it. We offer triple play services, so TV, telephone, and data. The gig unbundled is $70 for residential. And so it's a world-class offering. Looking at the smart grid, the advantages are, and actually EPB was able to build a business plan that made the fiber optic network work purely on smart grid. automated meter reading. It's a self-healing power system, and this is really incredibly powerful both for residents and businesses. What that means is that in really pretty much any grid other than EPBs, when a line goes down, the electric company doesn't even know it. They don't know that anything is wrong until you or your neighbors call and tell them that your lights are out. And at that point, they have to deploy a truck to drive up and down as much as a mile of line trying to figure out where the problem is. And then the first thing they do is manually do some switching to try to minimize the number of homes impacted by the outage, and then they fix it. In Chattanooga, everything up to that fixing it part takes place automatically, often in less than a second. So if a line goes down, the interrupters automatically begin communicating with each other and rerouting the power to minimize the outage. At the same time, they automatically notify EPB that there's a problem and where the problem is. And so many of the homes don't even really experience an outage, whereas before they might have been out for several hours or even days if it's a really severe situation. The other thing that the system allows is proactive maintenance. We're able to collect data that allows us to determine kind of the wear and tear of some of the many of the components of the system, which is very useful. From an economic development perspective, the biggest thing that it's done for us is to help enliven our entrepreneurial community. One of Chattanooga's challenges was that in the 80s and 90s, we did not have a lot of new startups. And that's really begun to change in the 2000s. And the fiber optic network has really accelerated that. We calculate that through our entrepreneurial efforts, we have supported companies in creating about 1,000 new jobs. These are our startup companies. We have several accelerators and incubators, and I can get into that more if that's of interest. And several of them have done very well. We have companies that have grown from 1 or 2 people to dozens just in a couple years. We also have some kind of standout startups. One of them started before the fiber optic network, but was definitely aided by it afterwards. And they grew their company to over 500 employees and then sold to another company. So Chattanooga's beginning to be a place where companies start, where they're acquired, where they grow employees, and that's been very powerful. The other economic development impact that we've seen is on recruitment. I will say this is a harder one, and we're still in the process of figuring it out in a lot of ways, but we have had a number of companies decide to move to Chattanooga. With recruitment, it's always kind of a kitchen sink proposition. They don't decide because of one thing, but we have had a customer care center that located in Chattanooga, and their decision point was the network, and they have grown 3 times. They have about 350 employees since landing here. And then we also have a cloud computing company that's moved most of its technical infrastructure to Chattanooga. As a result, they have found that they can deliver their cloud computing services even outside of our market much less expensively from Chattanooga than they can from other places. And so we think that there's a play for more of that to happen. So with that, I'd like to just open it up for questions. I find it's better when there's dialogue. I'm not even sure I'm speaking to the things you're interested about. So,
hi, Jed. So I'm Robert Wack. I'm one of the, I guess, moderators. Can you see me? Yeah, there I am. So I will open this up. Anybody have a question? So we're going to do a question and answer for the rest of our speakers at the end, but since we're going to lose you, we'll do it right now, if that's okay.
Yeah, that'd be terrific.
Okay. Question for, yes, Mr. Palmer. So the question is, were all the residences connected? Were they above ground or underground or a mix?
It's actually a mix. One of the innovative things that EPB has done is they figured out that they could run the fiber in the same conduit as the electrical. And we've had other communities tell us that's crazy, but we do it and it works. There is fiber that's strung along the electrical lines on poles as well as in conduit, so it's a mix of both. We do have an initiative now to put as much of our electrical and fiber underground as we can. And primarily we're focused on the areas that are most challenged by outages. So that's a program that'll take many years, more than likely.
Okay, any other questions? Yes, Ray.
How does the financing differ between what we're doing here in Carroll County versus Chattanooga? Chattanooga, if I understand it, Google or some other interest came in on a profit-based center versus what you're doing here.
So why don't we get into that when we do, we can get in, okay. Any other, yes?
And I would like to clarify, we did not have an outside entity come in Chattanooga. EPB did it on its own. We did receive a federal stimulus grant, which helped us to deploy it more quickly. But we have, for the bulk of it, done it on our own.
Yes, Ron.
This is more of a question on funding, but I mean, what was the motivation for getting this started and the motivation for actually getting the funding to make it happen?
Did you get that?
Yeah. Really, the motivation was the smart grid. Most electrical systems in the United States are about as technologically advanced as they were in the 30s and 40s. It's one of the few kind of technology infrastructure pieces that has not been updated very much. And EPB really figured that between the automated meter reading and the reduction in outages, the ability to handle a lot of situations without rolling trucks, they could build a business plan just on the electrical side. And then when you added in the opportunity for the telecommunications and the other things, it just made a fantastic opportunity to really take things to the next level for Chattanooga. And EPB seized upon that.
Mr. Cavacci.
One of the driving forces for us, of course, is the economic development factor. He talked about marketing, and he talked about a letter that made it into the New York Times. How are they marketing it? What kind of money are they spending to do that marketing? How broadly are they marketing?
Did you get that, Jed?
Yeah, I did. The primary marketing externally has been PR oriented. And on an annual basis since 2010, we have achieved a worldwide circulation of in excess of 150 million people per year with our PR placements. And that's been the primary way that we have gotten the word out. We, of course, do recruitment, which is very person-to-person oriented, and we've been very successful with that. One of the challenges with marketing something like this is that it is a very targeted appeal when you're trying to attract new companies. And I will say, at this point, I don't think we have completely leveraged the recruitment opportunities. We have found that the entrepreneurial aspect of it has been has caught fire much more quickly for us.
What's the adoption rate?
So, yeah, did you get that? The adoption rate? What's your take rate amongst your past customers?
We have, as I said, about 170,000 premises that can take it, and we currently have 61,000 customers on the fiber side. So we've done very well. We're actually double the minimal business plan that was constructed to make sure that this would, break even.
Yes, sir.
What was the lead time for A, planning, and B, actually
Did you get that?
Yeah, the lead time on the planning was probably about 10 years total. We did experience several non-engineering challenges. EPB was sued a few times on its way to being able to deploy. the fiber. So there were delays related to that. But once they actually got to the point of laying the fiber, it was about a 4-year deployment.
What's the total cost of the project?
Total cost of the project was about $500 million.
And then some. And over what kind of time period was that? Was that the 10
what kind
years?
of time period was it? It's, well, like I say, the deployment was over about a 4-year time period. The city issued bonds on EPB's behalf in order to do this, and we're ahead of schedule on paying back those bonds.
Follow-up question, what are the annual revenues you're realizing from deployment?
Annual revenues purely on the fiber side are in excess of, hold on. It's about $70 million in profit we cleared last year.
Yes, Frank. Sure.
Has the success created any problems as far as the area, as far as infrastructure, housing, having the schools available? And
Secondary problems.
secondary problems?
So any problems associated with the growth from the network? Any, congestion, schools, anything like that?
No, Chattanooga is interesting, I will say, from an economic development perspective. We have enjoyed kind of slow and steady growth for many years. And despite attracting a Volkswagen automotive plant, followed the next year by an Amazon distribution center that employs about 5,000 people, and deploying this, our growth rate has remained pretty steady, which on the one hand, you always want to go out in a blaze of glory, but we have kind of avoided the boom-bust cycle that a lot of faster-growing places have. I don't want to give you the wrong impression. We are growing, and we're growing a lot faster than we used to, but we're not having kind of a flash-in-the-pan kind of an experience. It's more predictable, sustainable growth.
All right, I think we have to move on to the rest of our program. Jed, I really, really appreciate you making the time to speak with us and share the Chattanooga experience with broadband. So thank you again.
Glad to do it.
Take care. Okay, so we're moving on to the panel discussion portion of the program. So if our panelists could come on up. And Dave Schaefer from Tier 1 Technologies is going to be our moderator. And he's going to ask a series of questions. We'll have some discussion, and then we'll close with a question and answer period that Dave will run.
Welcome, everybody. Again, what a neat night this is for our county. Very exciting about what's going on. So, just by way of very quick introductions again, you've already met Blair and Bill. And we also have Gary Davis, who is the CIO of Carroll County Public Schools here in the white shirt. Brian Holsenbake, president and founder of Skyline Network Engineering. John Wheatman, who is the administrator of operations and small business development for Carroll County Department of Economic Development. And Dr. Wack, who we've seen quite a bit of tonight, president of Westminster City Council and really involved in the broadband initiative here. So let's take a second and bring it back home for just a minute here into the county. Tonight, in talking to people numerous times, I've heard Gary referred to as kind of like the historian of the Carroll County Public Network and broadband in Carroll County. So I'd like to ask him to just bring us up on a bit of the history from kind of the beginning all the way up through right to this very moment as we sit here with what we've been doing in the county with broadband.
Right. So the first thing I would like to say about everything that's been done in this county is that it's been a very collaborative and team-oriented effort. From the public officials to the individuals actually working on it to the companies, it's been a Carroll County effort, and it's been excellent. So in 2002, when I took the job at Carroll County Public Schools, the first thing I realized that we were in great need of is all the things that we wanted to do as a school system instructionally and even administratively required a robust network that we did not have. We were paying through the nose for a leased network that just didn't make sense, and it could not grow to the point that we needed to that was remotely affordable. And the challenge was that we didn't have the infrastructure from the providers in the community. Not a knock on them, but companies are in business to make money, and Carroll County being more of a bedroom residential type of place at the primarily at the time, it just didn't make sense from an investment point of view for the companies to do that. So I immediately started thinking about dreaming and thinking about a fiber optic network. And I had a meeting with Carol Shelver from the Cable Regulatory Commission, and she said, "You sound exactly like Dr. Wack. I need to get you guys together." So Dr. Wack and I got together, and that's really kind of how the whole thing took off. The school system had paid for an audit by, it was Nortel at the time, to audit and say, what would it take for us to build a fiber optic network? Now, me being an employee of Carroll County Public Schools, but also a product of Carroll County Public Schools, a citizen of Carroll County that consumes services in Carroll County that is dependent on law enforcement and the fire, and having my roads cleaned off, and a frequent user of the Carroll County Public Library, and a part-time student at the community college. It quickly, as we looked at the map of the schools, we quickly saw that if we were going to build a fiber network of the schools, it pretty much touched most of the county, and we really needed to expand this concept out to include at least the community college, the public library, and the county government. So really what happened at that point, it immediately became clear to us that the primary goal of this from the start was truly economic development and helping the residents of Carroll County from a business perspective and individual perspective. But we knew the way to get there at the time, circling back to 2003, 2004, 2005, when you didn't talk a lot about this kind of things. It was a little bit different tenor at the FCC and everything about doing initiatives like this. We kind of focused on what we called the Carroll County Public Network, which is now the Carroll County Fiber Network. The Carroll County Public Network is just one little tiny network that's running on this infrastructure. But the four partners, basically the IT departments of these four entities, created a consortium, and we've been working on it ever since as a group, a collaborative effort. And it got to the point where we got a lot of buy-in from the community and from the elected officials that supported the effort, and we basically built the network, and we right now have about 170 miles of fiber in the county, 120 locations that are connected. But here's the thing to keep in mind, that the idea always was we had to have the backbone network throughout the county first before any of these other things could happen, like the great ideas that are happening in Westminster now wouldn't have been possible without that backbone. So that's really was the genesis of the whole thing. And we've been running our fiber network for, pieces of it, but going on 8-9 years. The school system has had a complete voice over IP phone system that we were able to get rid of Centrex and save tons of money. We've been doing that for 9 years successfully. So we have a fully functioning network, and the public network part of it is just to signify the four primary partners' use of just one small piece of that network. When we built it, we specifically did it way over capacity, 216 strands. So we have the capability of going gig, 10 gig, anywhere in our county. And that's really how was the genesis of the whole thing. And now it's to the point we have the backbone. Now it's up to Westminster and companies and entrepreneurs to take advantage of all this other capacity that we've built into and do a lot of more of the last mile type thing. So that infrastructure is there, and it's very exciting that we were in that position. But like I said, it was a collaborative effort that took a lot of, most of the work was done by the IT departments of these 4 organizations that worked together to get us to this point.
Great, great. Blair and Bill, could you kind of weigh in on what you know or have learned prior to this or this evening about what we've done here in Carroll County from what you've seen on a national perspective in your travels?
Well, the first thing I would say is this fits a pattern, which is the federal government is doing nothing and the cities and local governments are doing everything. And indeed, I say this somewhat ironically because I led the efforts that did the National Broadband Plan, but the truth is the most interesting things going on, which is part of the reason why after leaving that effort, I decided to work with local governments. The most interesting things going on are being done at the local level. The current chair of the FCC is a great guy and a friend of mine. I think he's trying to do a really good job. I just think it's really hard right now for a variety of reasons for the federal government to act in ways that really move the needle. And also, a lot of what you were saying really demonstrates how local governments have more incentive because they've got to have the networks that serve their anchor institutions and things like that. They control rights of ways. They have more levers. So that part is very, very consistent with a lot of the exciting things I've seen. The other thing I'll simply say is, again, I've worked with about 3 dozen communities, 2 dozen of which have made a significant amount of progress. There is a formula that all of them follow, which is you look at the problem and you, as I said earlier, at the end of the day, we buy this as a community. We may not think we buy it as a community, but we really buy it as a community. And the question is, how do you get to the most bang for your buck? There are basically 6 factors. How do you lower CapEx? How do you lower OpEx? How do you lower financial risk? How do you increase revenues? How do you drive an increase in benefits? And how do you have competitive forces, to the extent possible, drive a lot of those dynamics? You all made a series of decisions that I think are going to play out extremely well for you. They are similar to some of the communities I've worked with. They're very different than other communities I've worked with. My own point of view is that I shouldn't have a point of view, by which I simply mean my job is to help communities understand what the options are. But there was a community that, for example, as soon as they released an RFI, the cable company called up the mayor and said, well, we had no idea that you wanted anything other than what we're doing. Tell you what, why don't we just link 20 schools to fiber and you'll come and we'll cut the ribbon, it'll be great. And the CIO called me up and said, what do I do? The mayor loves this. But then after we do that, we pull the RFI, we have no leverage, we don't serve the other 100 schools, we don't do this. Look, those are the problems that people who put their name on the ballot have to address. Those are the problems that community leaders, those are their trade-offs, quick, long-term, financial risk, et cetera. But at the end of the day, I think your process recognizes what I think of as not the short-term economics, but the real long-term economics, and I think it's going to work out really well for you, so congratulations.
I add to one thing, we're the only county in the state right now that has the entire school system on its own private network, fiber optic network. And I think that speaks well of the whole county for having the vision to fund that and do that. The one thing I wanted to point out, just as a thank you, I mentioned Carroll County and the Cable Regulatory Commission, but they were absolutely key in getting us going because they funded a feasibility study that we did with Columbia Telecommunications and Joanne Hovis. So, and that, you know, of course, Dr. Wack was involved with that too. We've been in contact through this whole process from the city perspective and interested citizen perspective and Cable Regulatory Commission, but they were absolutely key in funding that. So again, that's just another demonstration of the collaboration, and it really took everybody kind of joining forces to make it happen.
Since you mentioned, I was actually at the FCC today. Another project I'm working on is assisting some folks in trying to reform the E-rate program, which is a program created by Congress, administered by the FCC, to connect every classroom in America. And it's a program primarily designed for low-income communities and rural communities. But one of the challenges is it's a lot cheaper to do it the way you did it. But there are a lot of communities that, since the federal government is picking up the tab, say, you know what, we'll just pay the incumbent phone guys a lot of money because it doesn't really cost us that much. But a lot of communities don't have the technical expertise you have. So it's a real challenge to the FCC to try to lower the cost, but at the same time try to do it in a way that doesn't force communities that don't have the expertise to do something they shouldn't do. But since you are a low-cost provider, I know that if the chairman of the FCC were here, he would want me to thank you for not using up that rather limited funding source.
I would just say three things. One, what you've described is very consistent with what we've seen in the successful communities, and it's a visionary leadership, seeing 10, 20 years down the road that this is undeniably going to benefit the county. And then collaboration, every community where this works the best, whichever model they tend to use, there's a collaboration, there's a recognition that when one small, like when Westminster gains, the rest of the county gains too. And then third, starting with schools and anchor institutions is a great way to start. And I think the more students who get involved and expect a gig connection and learn how to code and develop apps, the better it's going to be. And I think you have an opportunity, given that every school is connected, you have an opportunity to really run circles around a lot of communities in terms of the engagement of students.
Right, and the key to the collaboration of building it is one thing. Now it is opened up tremendous opportunities for collaboration from a community perspective of the school system collaborating with the community college, with the public library system to do the kind of things that you're talking about. And the economic development potential isn't just the companies, but by having a high-tech community, the things that you all mentioned earlier. I mean, one of the main reasons companies relocate is they look at the quality of the school system. And if you have a quality school system, that's a big bonus.
Yeah, exactly.
Brian, you have some exposure to some other market areas. Do you have any observations on that?
I was just going to reinforce that. Actually, how it really got started back, like in the Maryland, is probably back in the late 90s. The state of Maryland actually did a resource share agreement with Level 3. And the real point here is it's cooperation. If you ever try to have one person go out there and say, I'm just going to build everything, it never really financially works out. But through the combination of kind of that creative benefit where the obviously a commercial company like Level 3, they're a big internet provider, big fiber provider, they wanted access, they wanted right-of-ways, they wanted access to the highways. Well, the state of Maryland's like, sure, I'll give you access, but I need some strands of fiber. So that's actually how some of the early networks were built as they went in with state government. When I first started supporting state government, Maryland Department of Transportation and then state of Maryland, it was like 1998. It was pretty much T1s were the big circuit, which is shocking, right? I mean, it's hard to even imagine a T1. And that was expensive. It was like $400. For a T1, that's not even considered one of the small straws that Dr. Wack showed today. And then what they did is once that fiber was available in the right-of-way, the state had to put a little bit of money in to get, finish making the last miles. But then we converted a lot of the state government connections from T1s. At first, there was a lot of 100 meg connections, and that was like, wow, 100 megs. But that's very quickly went to gig, because it's like a commodity. It's so inexpensive to light something up at gigabit. And then a lot of the state governments, this is like a second piece. The magic isn't really just the fiber itself. It's actually the communication and the partnerships creatively between commercial and public entities.
And then the other thing you don't want to do, just because you have, let's say, 216 strands of fiber, you don't want to build 216 networks. What I mean by a network is where a bunch of routers and switches are, because then it ends up very costly. So another magic ingredient is making sure the network you put in, make sure you put in a really flexible one. The network basically moves the packets. The fiber is just a piece of glass. If you build the right kind of network and you build like a multi-service network, well then you could take in the hospitals, you can take in schools, you can take in, commercial entities, all over a common network. That's kind of like what Level 3 has in their backbones. They use technology like MPLS and other things. So the combination of those, so then the state worked with the counties, because it was nice. Carroll County didn't have to build fiber all the way back to Baltimore or Frederick or DC. Carroll County was able to build out basically to get just to where, let's see, is it Route 30, I think, and kind of like where 795 is, where 32 goes south into Howard, and then out, I think, Mount Airy out to 70, and then there's a lot of bandwidth in Baltimore, a lot of bandwidth in down in DC, and also in Frederick, because Level 3 in Virginia is kind of over there. But once you get access to that bandwidth, instead of, I don't know how much were your connections to schools, like what was your internet connection back in the day?
Back in the day, I mean, we had, our DS3 was like 44 megs of cloud.
And it was probably like, what, it was $5,000 or something?
Oh, yeah, I mean, yeah, absolutely.
It's insane. And now, to give you like a point of reference, we're in a data center, we do some hosting, we're able to buy let's just say it's $4,000 or $5,000, you're able to get almost 10 gigabits. So instead of 45 megs, almost 10 gigs for the same price. So the magic is, having that fiber, you now have access to that really, really low cost internet.
For those of you who don't know, that's a boatload of data.
It's big.
Okay,
it's
so if we're throwing gigs and megs and all this kind of stuff around, that's a boatload of data. So
in short, the magic really is that the cooperation between entities, people not trying to build it themselves, but find that creative mix.
John, do you have any comments from an economic development kind of perspective?
Yeah, as most of these go, we've talked on some very high-level areas, and then we break it back down into local community. And in terms of economic development potential as regards to Carroll, I guess I'll start by saying this. As a guy who's just young enough to have grown up on Sesame Street, I'm looking around, it's like, which of these things isn't like the others? And that's me sitting here. And the reason I say that is because it was only about 2 years ago when somebody came to me and said, oh, by the way, we need your help in negotiating an end to some of the grant funding through the ICBN, funding through the NTIA, on our middle mile of dark fiber to see how many LSAs we can get. And by the way, there might be a hut for us. And by the time that sentence was done, I think all I heard was hut. And I said, I know we're kind of rural, but huts, really? Okay. And so, I had to take a bit of a crash course into getting into that. And the point is this, what I realized very quickly and learning about what some of these folks up here have been working on for decades is the potential. And potential can be addictive. And in terms of local economic development, I would break it down into a few categories for your consideration, and they're these. We have existing businesses here now, today, that need this to be competitive. Some of them large, some of them small. That's a very present-day need. We've also seen and heard already what the future can hold, how it can change the landscape, the type of businesses, the type of jobs that arrive in this community. It's probably the one best hope we have of being a little bit less of a bedroom community and providing the kind of jobs here within our boundaries that people are going elsewhere to get. One thought that occurred to me at one point is that doing nothing is not an option. Doing nothing would be metaphorically equivalent to putting an arch over each and every road that comes into Carroll that's maybe 15 feet wide and 8 feet high, and telling every business in this county, every employee, every truck, every shipment in and out to this county has got to come through that arch. It's 15 feet wide and 8 feet high. And then standing back to see how many businesses would relocate here, how many businesses would continue to do business here. It's the kind of forethought from previous boards of commissioners and the current boards of commissioners to continue to work with this. And the organizations that are here in this room, as I look around and see academia and business and IT and government and so on, pulling together to make sure that we never have those arches over every road coming into this county. and then anybody who wants to do business here can do business here.
We're kind of thinking of the broadband as our Carroll County's interstate, if you will, for business. It's a real resource. Dr. Wack.
Sir.
Bring us up to speed on what the heck's going on with the City of Westminster initiative.
Sure. So to extend the highway road analogy, what the City of Westminster is doing couldn't be possible unless we had the interstate highway that is the ICBN, or the Inter-County Broadband Network. That's the fiber that runs throughout the state that Brian alluded to and some of the other speakers, which is now connected to the county road system, which is the county fiber network, which we actually built before the interstate was built. And now the city is building the roads through the neighborhoods and even the driveways, and which will then enable every home and business in the city of Westminster, at least initially, because I'm sure this will expand beyond that at some point, to access not only the local roads, but get out to the interstate and to the rest of the world. And so that's what we're doing in the city of Westminster. We've committed to connect every home and business in the city with fiber over the next several years, and we're breaking ground on that on Monday, actually. And we're very excited about the potential for this. One of the questions we get is, well, why is the city doing this? And I also use the road analogy. So some other communities, Ray, you asked about Chattanooga, and how does their model compare to what we're doing? Well, there's three general models out there. Well, two kind of ends of the spectrum. One is you have a local utility like their electric utility that has tons of money, $500 million. That's not bad. And has already the wherewithal, the infrastructure to go ahead and build something that big. That's great for them. We don't have that here. And then another model is the Kansas City model, where you have somebody like Google come in and build it for you. That's great. Again, we're never going to get that here. Google's not coming to Carroll County, at least not in our lifetime. And another problem with that, and we can sort of debate that, is Google's all well and good, but now you're just replacing one monopoly with another monopoly, and that's a big problem generally with how we get our telecommunication services, as Blair was saying. This is a common good. Why are we having to deal with all these monopolies? And that's part of what's holding us back. So Westminster sort of struck out on a different path, and I'd love to say we invented this model, but we didn't. We stole a lot of great ideas from a lot of other communities. But basically, we're looking at the fiber as a basic piece of infrastructure like roads. And just like the city of Westminster doesn't operate a pizza delivery service, we don't deliver packages for people, we aren't going to provide internet service. But we do plow roads, we do pave, we do put cement down. And so that's what, analogously, what we're doing with the fiber is we're laying the fiber, we're going to bring it right up to your door, but then somebody else is going to actually provide the service. And it's not going to be just one company, it's going to be a bunch of companies. And it's that competition which we haven't really talked about much, what the effect of telecommunications competition in communities, what it does to prices, what it does to quality of service. And these guys will tell you it's nothing but good. It immediately prices plummet and the levels of services skyrocket. And then you get all the ancillary economic development benefits. So that's what we're shooting for in Westminster. There's lots of other boring details that I won't go into.
What about the timetable or milestones for the project? Can you brief us on that?
As I said, we're breaking ground Monday. The first phase, will take us into next spring. And then we're just going to, assuming that everything goes well, which, that's the plan, we'll roll into subsequent phases, probably do the rest of the city in 2 or 3 other phases over the next 3 to 5 years. As you can see, it's really firm. But, some of that's going to depend on engineering challenges. Some of it's going to depend on how easily we can get up onto poles. Some of it's going to depend on how much rock we hit when we're tunneling to do the underground stuff. So a lot of variables, but the commitment's there to see this through and make it successful. And other venues, people have asked, well, why are you doing it to every home and business? Why not just those ones that, the low-hanging fruit, which is what a lot of other communities have done. And because we're doing this with tax dollars, the mayor, the city council, city staff, feel very strongly that, again, this is a public good. This is something that it's a moral obligation that we're using public funds. We need to make sure that this is available to everybody, including, who told the anecdote about the trailers? That was you, Bill. Right?
Jed.
No, it was Jed, that's right. Yeah, right. So every single home and business needs to have this, because if this is the future, if this is what we're putting in place so that we can realize our future potential, then everybody has to have access to it. And we're spending taxpayer money to do it, so they deserve it. So.
Very good, thank you. Okay, folks, we'd like to open up the floor to questions to these gentlemen. If you have any questions, Commissioner?
Thank you for the presentations. We have a conundrum here in Carroll County. We still have thousands and thousands of homes and businesses that are not connected to any broadband, and in many cases they're also outside of 4G range. And the problems become exponentially more expensive when you add in the fact that it's low-density development, 100-acre farms, homes that are half a mile apart. So my question has to do with, if you were the commissioners, how would you approach solving this problem? Because I'm concerned that we're stagnant right now in terms of our ability to solve this problem. And I myself, I will admit, I don't know what market vehicle to use. Do we do nothing? I hope the free market brings us our final model of connectivity. Do we go to the other extreme, completely recompete the cable franchise, requiring, as Dr. Wack said, whoever bids on it to take not only the low-hanging fruit, but the high-hanging fruit, which means all the rural homes and businesses, or do we compete part of a contract, get government involved, and do a complete compete of all the rural areas of the county for one or two last-mile providers? I was listening to the numbers from Chattanooga. They sounded pretty good, assuming he knew what he was talking about. He said they invested $500 million, and he said $70 million in profits. I don't know whether that was profits or revenue, but if in fact that's true, then those were pretty good numbers. That's a pretty good ROI. So my question is this. I'm asking for advice as a commissioner. Do we leave this alone and let the free market get these last 10 or 20,000 homes hooked up? Do we complete a master contract for these rural homes? Or do we recompete the entire basic cable franchise and require somebody bid it all? Any recommendations or advice? I'd certainly appreciate it. You ignored Westminster's model.
Well, actually, I didn't ignore Westminster's model. I think what Dr. Wack did is laudable. I respect it and appreciate it, but it's just more difficult because of the distances and the expense. And some people would say, well, why should someone who lives in a dense area where you've got maybe houses sitting on quarter-acre lots subsidize the cost of hooking up a house that's half a mile off the beaten track? And the sheer distances and low density make the problem much more complex from a financing standpoint. And of course, they drive the cost way up.
So if I was an entrepreneur, there are some of the rural areas, and I've got people I know, friends, they're like this far from where Comcast will, this house has it, but they won't give it to theirs because of the rules, which, they have their rules. There's a lot of things that can be done with other technology, like wireless technology. There's no reason. The point of the backbone network is that it reaches primarily, and the geography in Carroll County is definitely challenging. I think we all recognize that. It's a little bit different than, say, even the Eastern Shore, where it's, relatively flat. But, there are areas where, if I'm the entrepreneur, I'm going to connect up to this backbone, and I'm going to maybe provide some kind of wireless service for those areas. So, I think there's a lot of other technical possibilities that aren't necessarily the ultimate, which is, fiber to the doorstep, but certainly would be a vast improvement over what the capabilities are now. And that's, I think we've created, to me, it's much like, when we drove here tonight, we didn't stop several times and pay the toll booth to drive on the private roads. We drove on public roads. But it's the private companies that are driving and building buildings and the businesses that we want to drive to get to. And I think what we've done is we've created that backbone, that infrastructure that to enable that. And now it's really time for the entrepreneurs and all the other creative people to kind of step to the plate.
It is.
For those of you who may not be aware, there is a map in the back of the room.
And it's, under present technology, to my mind, it's hard to imagine a solution that has a hard wire going to each residence and business in the county. At some point, the cost and the return on investment does rear its head. However, I think it's important to note that when we talk about wireless solutions in the context of broadband internet and fiber optic networks, the wireless solutions are not 4G solutions. If I understand the physics at all, the physics of radio waves are finite. We're reaching a point in cellular technology where we're approaching saturation in terms of bandwidth and speeds, talking about cell phones and smartphones. However, in wireless solutions that tie right back to the fiber optic network, we're not there yet in terms of hitting our heads on that speed. So we're talking about wireless solutions to reach certain parts of the county where perhaps a wired solution just is not a good solution. These wireless speeds are going to be far in excess of what you're getting on your phone. These are not 4G speeds. These are much, much faster.
Just to kind of play devil's advocate, I don't think that the constraints of density or the lower density in the more far-flung parts of the county are necessarily as big as an obstacle as private sector vendors would have us believe. And the reason why is because as public entities, we can amortize this stuff over 20, 30 years. And we have a much lower ROI threshold to get to than the private sector does. So although it may be that there are parts of the county that it may never make sense to take fiber all the way to it, it's a much bigger area for us with our financial constraints than it would be for the private sector. So I'm not as pessimistic that there isn't a fiber solution for a decent chunk of the county. I don't know, you guys want to speak to the economics of that?
Well, this is painful to hear because I thought the National Broadband Plan took care of all those problems. No, sir, I mean, there is a percentage of America that doesn't have this. I would say, first of all, we often talk about wired and wireless networks. The truth is the same network. Pretty much all devices these days are untethered. There's kind of the big fiber that connects to a small cell that's what we call Wi-Fi. There's the big cell tower. What I believe is probably true is that the fiber backbone that you created creates an economic opportunity that has not yet been realized, particularly when combined with new technologies, particularly in what's called fixed wireless, which is, it doesn't quite give you the functionality of being able to drive and watch a video, but most people actually don't drive and watch videos, but it does give you the functionality of nomadic. You can walk around your house and stuff like that, or the business. And in particular, there's a technology called white spaces that utilizes, the interesting thing about rural is the economics of fiber are more difficult, but there's a lot of spectrum in the broadcast area that's not being utilized at all. And so there's a technology that Google and Microsoft are playing with, actually a lot more in Africa than here, but we actually did an experiment in Morganton that worked pretty well, Morganton, West Virginia. If you give me your card, I'll send you some folks. But I have a feeling you could put together kind of a
hybrid,
some kind of proposal, and entrepreneurs would come and say, if you give us access to that fiber backbone, we can figure out a way to make it work.
Thank you. Anybody else? You need to be on mic, Tom.
Yeah, I mean, my question's similar to that, but I mean, one of the things that, like I said, we've played with the experiment. I've actually moved to one of those rural areas that doesn't have, and are experimenting with the fixed Wi-Fi between 2 points, and it's piqued my interest in the fact that it can be done. I mean, and what I'm trying to ascertain from this is what's the next step. I mean, yes, all these technologies, all this, I mean, you talked about the cooperation, which this is great. I'm glad that it happened. It's here. Now we're at the next step. Where's that cooperation going to have between the business community, the various entities, how that's going to function? I'd like somebody to shed a little more light on how that's going to work. I mean, you had the 4 entities that came up with the interstate. How are we going to take the next step? How is this where companies are going to come in and say, yuck, I got this great idea, but I may not have necessarily the hundreds of thousands of dollars to stick up antennas everywhere to make something happen. Or maybe I can't do laterals here and there. How's this going to happen? I guess that's what I'm looking for, the answer on how that's going to work.
Sounds like an excellent opportunity for a bold, visionary entrepreneur in the technology space. So, all right, I'll tell you, you know, the city of Westminster is not getting involved in that. So we're not going to make a plan that says we want the private sector to do this and do this, do this, do this. Okay.
How do we get the partnerships? How do we sit down? I mean, it's going to be a partnership. Well, for example, if we were doing something, or Kevin QIS, we're coming in, we're trying to do fixed point wireless. The market for that is not huge. Okay, it's not something where I come to Gary and I say, guys, I want an entire ring of your fiber. I can go all the way around the county. The cost prohibitive to get that set up and operational. It's almost like an incubator thing, sitting down trying to figure out how we help you get that last mile. At the same time,
An incubator thing.
that's what I guess that's where I'm trying to understand.
It is, and really in an attempt to not make the conversation circular, it's a repeat of the same scenario in this regard, is that if there was a private sector return on investment solution, we probably wouldn't be sitting right here today. There wouldn't have been a middle mile necessity. County government would not have had to become involved. There wouldn't have been an NTIA. There wouldn't have been an ICBN. So it exists for that reason. And just because the middle mile is complete, just because we have dark fiber in the rings around the county, as you see on the map there, doesn't necessarily mean that magically the last miles are going to appear. And we know that. And so the question becomes, it's one part policy, it's one part entrepreneurship, it's one part business plan, and there aren't a whole lot of benchmarks for this because there certainly isn't any one way to do it, and you don't have dozens and dozens and dozens of studies at which to look. What you have in essence are anecdotes. So that's where we sit today. We have a very powerful asset. I mentioned the word potential already. We got a tremendous amount of potential sitting out there. But there isn't one clear path, I think, that any of us could sit here and articulate and say, oh, this is the way it's done. That answer isn't known. I don't know that answer. But it becomes starting these sort of conversations to say, what are we going to do with this asset? Who steps in? Where does private sector fit in? Where does government fit in? How do we make this work for everybody? So I know I'm answering your question with a question, but that's where we are.
This is the dialogue I'm trying to get
Yeah.
involved in and
Right.
figure out how we do this. I mean, like today I got quoted, I'm not going to say which town it was. They called us asking about trying to light up a park. We said we could come help them, but we'd like to have access to a water tower. He turned around and said, okay, no problem, $2,500 a month, you can have access to the water tower. By the way, we're going to charge you for power, we're going to charge you for access, we're going to charge you for anything else.
Yeah.
For me to make a model to just see whether or not I can make money with a 5-year commitment, $2,500 a month, sorry, I've got other places I can make money. I don't need to take that leap.
Yeah.
Okay, so, but the technology could be viable, but I don't know. We don't know how far it can push.
Sure.
I mean, and I'm sure Kevin's in the same boat on the other side of the room with how much jump do we want to make to provide this last little bit of bandwidth if we decided to do this? So.
And that's just it. The one thing on which I remain adamant is that whichever path we take, and yeah, community is an overused word sometimes, but this is a community effort. Whichever path we take, ultimately where we need to get is what we just heard about Chattanooga. He was able to say it's $70 a month for a gig. Ultimately, that's where we have to go. That's what we have to be able to deliver to business to turn this into an economic development engine. As I mentioned earlier, hooking up existing businesses now is important. In some ways, that's the easier thing to do. It's how do we get a package out there that's going to have a business say, okay, I need to be in Carroll. Or to have somebody who's working from home right now who doesn't have broadband at all say, you know what, I can start my business in my home. It's easier for me to articulate the goals. I can articulate the destinations better than a path, but that's what we're here talking about.
How about a YouTube video to teach homeowners how to do point-to-point wireless from their house? What do you think?
I had some more thoughts on that.
But you know, that was a valuable piece of information, the challenge with the tower access. And John, maybe one of the things we need to do is find the top 3 or 4 impediments that we can control on the government side, and see if we can make them disappear by maybe providing free access to towers, providing free right-of-ways, and see whether or not by removing those impediments, it would pass the hurdle rate for the free market to then take this on and get this project done, or to quote a popular TV show, get her done, so we don't have tens of thousands of homeowners that are still out there disenfranchised.
I was going to reinforce that approach where, so that was, the more, if you just have like a single, now with the exception of that huge power company had such existing expenses that they were able to find the cost savings with the help of sound like they had some federal support as well. They made it their own, the business model worked with them individually. That may not work all the time. So it'd be a combination that we talked about, but then also sitting down like you were talking about, and then bringing in other entities. Maybe the power people, have some kind of, cost benefit. And I think the magic is just trying to find that expense and revenue stream and the way each person's model works, combined with what you already have. Kind of, we were talking about like, hey, we already have whatever. We already have $7.95. We already have $140 and $32. But think of that as the fiber piece. Hey, I can easily give you access to this if that helps you do that. And then, of course, at the same time, you always want to find that, you want to have that replenishing type model as well. Obviously, the county would like to have, lease the fiber to commercial companies so that commercial companies could make money. But of course, the county wants to make enough to maintain, and then in certain times, just like they build more roads, let's go build more fiber, taking input from other commercial companies that say, hey, if you can get me over to here, this would help me a lot. So it's that combination of communication and partnership.
And I think the key to it is getting to the right people in the towns that you're talking to, and by events such as this, getting the word out so people are more aware, so that person in that town that said, oh yeah, well we're going to charge you $2,500, that they start rethinking these things. As Commissioner Rothschild said, we need to get that information out there to start removing those impediments. But you're like the point-to-point thing, that's what we did all along as we were building out the network. In fact, there's one school left that's not technically fiber, it's on a wireless connection, it's on our network, and Dr. Wack is going to help us with this because it happens to be located in the city of Westminster. But it was a huge cost to get to Westminster Elementary School because of the pole rights. So we had a cooperative effort with McDaniel College. We brought the fiber to McDaniel College, and we located a point-to-point. Now there's a 100 meg connection to Westminster Elementary, and all the computers in that building are like the households, right? So there's 100 megs that's shared amongst all those computers in that. So those are the kind of solutions that make a tremendous amount of sense to be able to do that, to do a point-to-point to an area that is underserved. It might be a short-term solution. Dr. Wack may be right. It may be in the long term you get the fiber there, but there's nothing to prevent us from doing these short-term, and it's not that expensive.
That's kind of what, I mean, like I said, I'm one of the great unwashed masses. I used to be sitting in downtown Westminster, had anything I wanted. I used to be sitting in downtown Westminster and had anything I wanted.
Because that's how Westminster is.
That's how it is. And then I have my business down the street where I have 4 different internet connections, and if anybody goes down, we just swap things around. And then I moved out up on Gablehammer, and the first thing my son was famous for walking to the house and going, "Got broadband? We're not staying here." And it was a beautiful house with a pool, 6 acres. I said, okay, I got to figure this out. Now I'm getting mine courtesy of Lippy Brothers grain silo because it happens to be tall enough for me to hit.
Exactly.
And so, I mean, it's not impossible, but there's a lot of people, your moderators, in the same boat. And the people love living out here, but like I said, running fiber up my hill, good luck.
So along the lines of the economics of deploying this fiber, and this all goes to why the city has chosen the model that we have. And so when you look at the cost of a network deployment, about 2/3 of your capital expense is just in the fiber, and then another 20-some% is in your electronics, and then that last little bit is software and people. So by having the fiber, just the fiber, the dark fiber, having that capital expense taken out of the equation by the public sector doing that, you completely change the economics of these new kinds of opportunities. So that's the first argument for publicly owned dark fiber. The second is that most of these situations that you guys have been talking about have been point to point. Like, well, how do I get from here to there? Because I got this customer here. So the economics of that, it's very small potatoes. You know, you're talking about the revenue from one customer has to carry the capital investment for that one piece. But when you have a network, the whole network carries the cost. And the bigger the network, the more economic benefit and the more potential revenue comes off that network. It's the network effect. It's a thing in economics, right? So which again goes to why publicly owned fiber, dark fiber, it just makes so much sense, because you are magnifying the benefits and you are decreasing the costs for the private sector then to take advantage of those economic opportunities. So, you know, that's kind of how we got to where we are. That's one of many reasons.
And let me see, I want to phrase this. Let me suggest this. On a short list of things that when I started in this position I was told I would never get done was to get all 8 towns in a room together to agree on anything. And we've done that, and I'm very proud of that. And it wasn't necessarily very easy. And there were 2 reasons that we did that. One, because somebody told me I couldn't do it. 2 was because it put together a framework and a mechanism, a working group that we didn't have before. Now, I know we've got people in this room that are probably from each municipality that we have here in the county. Based on Commissioner Rothschild's comments and Tom's comments, I would be very eager to use that umbrella, that organization that we have, to begin to work on some of those things like water tower issues and find out what stands in the way and to pull the towns together to do that. But I bring it up for this reason, is that in order for that to happen, the people in this room are going to have to help with that. I know we've got some town council people here, we've got some economic development people here, some commission people here. That's great. We also have a lot of business owners here. I'm going to encourage you to get with your town economic development people if you're a larger town that has that. If you're a smaller town, less staff, get with your town council people, get with your mayor. Let them know if this is something that you would like to happen. And it would be a great benefit to me from the Department of Economic Development if that grassroots rises at that level and we can get that group working on some of these things. It's a great way to enact some of the things that we're talking about here. And my concern over symposium sometimes is that there's a lot of good words, but what happens tomorrow? I know we got a lot happening Monday, so there's stuff happening. I'm not suggesting there isn't, but what I'm using a lot of words to say is that if we want this to happen as a community, if you're in a municipality, if you're one of the towns, take this back. Let them know that you'd like to see this. Let them know that you would like some of their folks working on it, and we'll do everything we can to continue to spearhead this and make that happen on that level.
Thank you. Sir, you've been patiently waiting to ask a question over there.
This is actually for, I guess, Dr. Wack. We've talked about the last mile, or when you get the fiber, you're starting Monday, who's going to be the ISP? Has that been all contracted?
So, no, it hasn't.
Why is this taking so long? Is my question.
Well, you heard what these other communities have been through.
Yeah.
Let's just say it's not easy. So in terms of who's going to be providing the service today, I don't know that. We're working on that. So we're working on not only getting you one, but trying to get you as many as possible, so that you have choices. And because it's those choices that create competition, that drive down prices, and that get you better service. But it doesn't happen overnight. And I wish I had a little magic wand to go, pooh, and solve that problem. But there's a lot of moving parts, and suffice to say, we're working very hard on it, and it's coming, but I just can't give you an answer today.
Anybody else?
I wondered if William Wallace could kind of give us a sense of how US Ignite could help with some thought process on where we are as a community with us at this point. You had talked about maybe you would want to, as a community, get involved with US Ignite or whatever. From your perspective, based on what you're hearing, what thoughts do you have?
Yeah, as I said, I think you're in a very good position with the fiber backbone you have and the fact that the schools are all connected. And then you've got one community moving with a creative model to bring fiber to the end users. Where we come in is when fiber's there, creating a series of teams within a community to develop new applications. So, I mean, I love the fact that you have this great community college and you're connected to all the high schools. We work with teams. Let's say we come up with an application that creates an immersive learning experience for high schools in STEM learning. We'd love to find partners in the community college, perhaps, who want to help us create the content for that, and then work with the county school system. So we kind of do it on a project-by-project basis to come up with next-generation apps that will take advantage of this network that you're putting in place. And we'd love to do that. And then take some ideas from the 35 other communities that are part of US Ignite.
We have some folks in the back that were raising their hands. Matt, way back.
How you doing? I'm Matt Taylor.
You need the mic there, Matt. Hang on a sec.
Okay. You really have a big voice. Thank you. My name is Matt Peeling. I'm the Chief Information Officer for Mosaic Community Services. We're a large health provider in Maryland of both behavioral health, substance abuse, and somatic services. I've actually served on the Technology Advisory Board back year 2000 when all this was coming to a head with Comcast and the problems we were having then. My frustration with one of our data centers being up here is not having time frames. I can't plan. I'm in a position now where I am actually considering moving my technology out of Carroll County because I don't know when I'm going to be able to leverage this opportunity that's here. You know, we're looking to do things like game education with our clients, prescribing games for them to play while they're on medications, so we can get that data back and measure their environment and how they're doing. Those kind of things I can't do if I'm sitting around and waiting for technology. So really what I'm trying to get at here is what kind of time frames are we looking at?
I think it's kind of a broad target. I don't know, so it kind of, to make it easier, you got to first know what's the gap. So I don't know if you've been talking to Comcast or QIS, I'm not sure. And then you identify the gap, and then it's engaging the right people to figure out, hey, how do we close that gap? And so I don't know if that's already happening, but that's essentially.
Where are you located?
We're all throughout the Green Street. We have residential homes in Liberty Street and Church Street. I'm also a business owner in New Windsor, so I'm looking for service there.
With your locations in the city of Westminster, within 3 to 5 years. I mean, I know that sounds kind of soft, but it's soft. I mean, that's the best I can tell you today. We're breaking ground on Monday, and we're going to go as fast as we can. But it's hard work. It's very complicated. It's very expensive, and we're doing the best we can.
Yeah, no, I completely understand that. Yeah, one of the other, Mark Crider, the nonprofit center, you know, they're dealing with issues with saturation on Comcast. So we might actually be able to get that fiber before Comcast decides to do something. So appreciate the information. That's more than I've gotten. I appreciate it.
So if he needs to move to the airport, we'll have it even sooner.
Yeah, that's true. Whoop, hold on. Say that into the mic.
Just, if you're in downtown, the air park will be lit first. The air park and in a very short period of time. So if that's an issue and you're talking about leaving us, come talk to us first at the city, and we might be able to help facilitate getting you out at the air park where there will be fiber much sooner, probably within the next year and a half.
6
right?
months.
Yeah, okay, even better.
Any other questions? Comments? Microphone. It's for the recording. It's for the recording purposes.
I just wanted to applaud everyone for keeping the monopolies out of the business model. But my question, I guess, really was to Blair: is you're working with so many communities across the country. Is that something you find very unique, or is it more like the Chattanooga where you're tied in with the utility, or the Google where you're tied in with Google, you're tied in with a single entity? I was just wondering how unique that was.
I think what what's happening here is more consistent with smaller, more rural communities where the incumbent cable companies and the incumbent telephone companies have either not invested or are looking to simply harvest their past investment, are not really looking to the future. And so I think what you're doing is both creative and probably essential. I haven't studied enough to know that really. In larger communities, I think it's tough because the incumbents have so many embedded advantages. Some of them are, for example, where you have a lot of multiple dwelling units. They have contracts that go for a number of years, but they don't all like expire at the same time. You can't like have a new entrant who says, I'm going to come in, but because the contracts all expire in 2017, that's my entry year. It doesn't work that way. So, you know, and it is only a company like Google that has very significant financial resources, and this is sometimes not well understood. They're already in the network business. They move bits all over the place. They have a lot of network assets. So I think what you're doing is a little bit unique because it's so difficult to do in the larger communities where the incumbents will fight and compete. It's actually very interesting. In North Carolina, I did not expect AT&T to be as aggressive in their bidding on the project we did there, but they actually in some ways were more aggressive than Google. I don't think you ever solve any problem forever. I think you have to figure out where, and this is, again, people whose name are on the ballot have to figure this out, what you can do in the near term to make life better for at least the midterm and maybe kind of longer term. But, you know, in capital intensive industries tend to move toward monopoly and how we keep it fresh and how we keep it different. Gig.U has a lot of successes, but we also had some failures. We had a false start in Seattle. We had a false start in Chicago. And I think that's an example of big, and by the way, the cities wanted to have a provider who did exactly what you're doing, which is you build the fiber and then you have competition on a layer on top of it. But in those communities, it's not like you're taking out the telco guy or the cable guy. You're going to be competing with them too. So I think it's a very difficult model in certain circumstances.
Very good. Ron? Quick.
Thank you. It would seem to me that if all of this were free, we'd already have it. But it's not free. And the city of Westminster is standing up to the plate, and I guess they're paying for it. Is that correct?
Oh, yeah.
So you're paying for it, but do you have a plan, an ROI plan? How are you going to get the ROI? How are you going to generate revenue from?
So the service providers will lease the fiber from the city, and that will finance the debt service.
So it would seem to me also that the city of Westminster, in a lot of respects, is a miniature Carroll County. And a lot of what's going on in Westminster, we ought to be able to take advantage of in Carroll County to do the same thing.
But they don't have a proximity problem. They have a proximity.
Well, I understand
advantage.
that. I understand the proximity problem, but you know, you're building the roads, you're maintaining the roads, but you don't build the driveway, or at least Carroll County won't build the driveway. The individual homeowner would build the driveway. So
or not,
or not. But it's his choice at that point. So if he either wants it or you don't want it. Just my comments.
Thank you. Thanks, Ron. Appreciate it. Well, we're pushing up against closing time, so I'm going to thank the panel very much, and especially our gentlemen who aren't local. Thank you very much for sitting down here and talking to us. We really appreciate that, Blair and Bill. And I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Wack for a couple of closing remarks.
Thanks, Dave. Thank you, Dave, for moderating. Great job. Appreciate the help. I want to thank everybody for coming out tonight. Great turnout. It's awesome to see this enthusiasm for this very important aspect of our future. I want to thank the community college again for hosting us. And Carroll Technology Council for organizing this. Big Screen Store for putting out that awesome display of that massive TV. And especially thank you again to Quantum Internet and the Brown family for their sponsorship of the event. We will, so we're sort of done here. We're going to reconvene at O'Lorden's. If you want to do any sort of post-symposium networking or relaxation, further discussion about broadband and the future in Carroll County. Thanks again, everybody, for coming out.
Yeah, me too.